Hello everyone, how are you today? Hope your day is going well. Alright, haven't marked your assignments. I'm happy at what I saw. It shows you're actually following in the lectures. I'm happy from the way you answer the questions. It was really satisfactory. Alright, let's move on. We are still on chapter 1, Introduction. We've talked about the background to the study, what you know about the problem you're working on, the interest, what made you get interested in the topic. And we talked about statements of the problem, your statement, and then the next one was research questions. Okay, today we are going to talk about the objectives, purpose of the study. Just like every other thing in a research project, the objectives of the study is closely related to the research problem. They are not really the same, but they are closely related. The former derive directly from the latter. You need to get the research problem first, and then you derive the objectives from the research problem. The objectives of the study, sometimes referred to as purpose, represent the aims of conducting the investigation and could be categorized into broad and specific. The objective, that's the purpose of the study, the reason, your reason for going into that study. What are your aims? What do you plan to achieve? That's the objective. Like we said, it derives from the research problem. You talk about the problem first, and then you go into the objectives. It's categorized into two. You have the broad and the specific. Broad, that's wider aspect, and then you have the specific. The broad objective states the overall aim of a research project, the overall aim, wider view of it. Whereas the specific objective is concerned with the detailed list of intentions about what the research stands to achieve at the end of the exercise. So the broad objective is a wider view, and then the specific one gives you more details of the intentions. Excuse me. Usually, the specific objectives are stated in the form of declarative statements of the research questions. This means that while the research questions take the interrogative statement form, the objectives present the same thing but in a statement form. The objective is more direct. It declares the statement. The research questions are in a form of interrogation. It interrogates, but objectives defines the statement, puts this in a statement form. Now we look at the significance of the study. Whatever study you're working on, it has a significance. Remember, we said whatever you are doing has to bring in a plus to whatever is in existence already. Any research you are doing, there has to be a difference you're adding to what is on ground. That makes your research good enough. It is expected that every research project must have something new to contribute to knowledge in that subject area, however small, no matter how small. +1, +2, +3 it's better than plus nothing at all. 0 is 0, +1 is +1. So if you're giving a +1, it may be small, but is better than +0. So there must be something new you're contributing to the knowledge on ground. As a matter of fact, no research should take place if it will not contribute anything to knowledge, as this represents the hallmark of all research endeavors. So a research is not a research if it has nothing to add to knowledge. As simple as that. If it's exactly the same thing we already know that you're giving to us, or you're giving us even less than what we already know, then it is not a research. What makes it a research is that it has to add to the existing knowledge. Therefore, this segment is expected to explain the likely benefits of the research and to whom such expected benefits would be meant. All these should be clearly stated. In any case, there is no hard and fast rule as to the number of benefits that a research project should have or its length. Yes, I think we've said it before. There's no hard and fast rule as to the number of benefits it should have. The important thing is that it adds to knowledge. It is better than what we have known before you started working on it. So the benefits or the length of the project, there is no hard and fast rule about it. It can be serialized or itemized or paraphrased depending on the individual style of writing. So it's your choice depending on your own style of writing. You can paraphrase it, just aim at adding to existing knowledge. Okay, let's go to scope and limitation of the study. You have a scope, you have limitation. The scope of the study simply refers to the extent of coverage of the subject matter being investigated, and the proper statement of the problem will serve as a useful guide to doing this. The scope, the extent of coverage, the extent you intend to cover, how wide you want to, what you're working on is. In other words, if the problem had been properly stated at the onset, it assists automatically in defining the scope of the research. So the statement matters. When you state it properly, it will assist in defining your scope. When you state your problem, that will determine the scope you're going to work on. That is why the scope of the study is partly a function of the title of the research project. The scope is partly a function of the title. If well formulated, the expression of the title alone does define the scope of the study and perhaps needs a little rider to make it clearer. The limitation of the study represents the other side of the coin. Now, before we continue, let me just list down what we have talked about and then get into this scope of the study. You know, we are still in objectives, okay? We're talking about the introduction. We said 1, we talked about the background. The statements. And research question. This is just to help cast your mind back so that it will help you to follow up. Now, the next one is objective. We talked of objectives and then significance of the study. Before we move on, objectives, significance. I'm just trying to cast our minds back so that we'll kind of remember, to help us to remember and be able to follow up. We talked about background to the study. statement of the problem, research questions, objectives, significance, and then scope. Okay, we are now on the scope of the study. At least looking at it, it will help you to follow up. The scope and limitation, sorry. The scope of the study, like we said, it refers to the extent of coverage. Okay, we've talked about it. Now, okay, let's go through it again. The scope of the study simply refers to the extent of coverage of the subject matter being investigated, and the proper statement of the problem will serve as a useful guide to doing this. When you state well, it will guide you on the scope. In other words, if the problem had been properly stated at the onset, it assists automatically in defining the scope of the research. So you need to state your problem very well to help you to get your scope. That is why the scope of the study is partly a function of the title of the research project. If well formulated, the expression of the title alone does define the scope of the study, and perhaps needs a little rider to make it clearer. So when you formulate your title very well, that one alone will help you to define, to get your scope. The limitation of the study represents the other side of the coin: scope and limitation. Therefore, if the scope was concerned with the extent of the study's coverage, then limitation means building a fence around the subject of the investigation. Limitation, you're limiting it to a particular area, like building a fence. You know, when you build a fence around a compound, it means this is the extent you can go. You can't go beyond this fence. So limitation is kind of building a fence on the work you're going to do. You're not going to exceed a particular range. This is with a view to establishing a basis for the non-inclusion of certain things in the study for obvious reasons. There are certain things you don't need to, they are not necessary for you to include in your study. To limit one study is quite essential if the study must be focused and yield expected results. So you don't need to start going far and wide and digging deep into so many other things that are not necessary. You limit it, and it helps you to be focused on what you're working on, and it will help to yield the results that you expected to get. So that being focused is very important. The limitation assists you so that you don't have to start going into things that are really not necessary in your work. This fence building exercise helps the study to have and preserve its own identity. This should be identity, not identify. Thereby helping the researcher to avoid the interference of extraneous factors which are not intended to be part of the study from the beginning. Yes, just like I said, it will prevent you from going wider into things that are really not necessary in the work you're doing. Limitation, scope. Limitation, scope and limitation of the study are therefore like the two sides of a coin. The same coin, but two different sides. In that, one explains what is included in the study, while the other is concerned with what was not intended to be included. Scope, the overall thing that is supposed to be included in the study. Everything, the overall view. Then limitation, what is not intended, limiting you to a particular, not going beyond a particular place. All right, let's look at the basic assumptions. Basic assumptions. Although many tend to confuse assumptions with hypotheses, it is important to state very categorically that they are not the same. Assumptions you're assuming something. You're not sure of it. You don't even know about it. You're just assuming this is this. This could be that. We have already talked about hypotheses. Yes, we've talked about hypotheses, what they mean, and their significance in a research project. Remember, we've talked about hypotheses initially. Now, assumptions are just mere statements. Oh, sorry, I've not written this down. Basic assumptions. Let's put it down. 7 is basic assumptions. We are done with scope and limitation. We are going to basic assumptions. So like we said, assumptions they are mere statements. You don't even know much about it. They are different from hypotheses. Now, assumptions are just mere statements which are often not subjected to any testing. You know, your hypothesis is subjected to testing. Your hypothesis is subjected to testing, and then you get your results, your conclusion, everything, and it ceases to be a hypothesis. But assumptions, like we said, are not subjected to any testing. They are more or less mere statements, ordinary statements that are taken for granted. Statements that are just made casually, they are taken for granted. They cannot take the place of hypothesis. Yes, we've known hypotheses can be tested, they cannot be tested. So they cannot take the place of hypothesis. Yet they tend to duplicate the hypothesis because they are quite similar. They are similar but not the same. It is for these reasons that many have suggested that if the study has hypotheses, then assumptions would no longer be necessary. Okay? For a study with research questions only, however, it is advisable to have assumptions to serve as a guide towards the realization of the research objectives. Assumptions are usually itemized while the number varies. Okay? Now we go to the operational definition of terms. Operational definition of terms. This is 9. What did we miss out? Let me look at this. Okay, this is a typographical error. This should be 1.8, not 1.9. Operational definition of terms. Okay, operational definition of terms. This segment of the introduction is used to provide a sort of working definition to all the items which will be operationally used in the course of the study. You know, as you're working on the study, there are certain terms that you need to define out. The idea is that there are some terminologies which have been adapted, unquote, and so used restrictively for the purpose of the research project. This means that such terminologies would mean something slightly different from the one adapted under a different situation. So talking about that particular course you're working on, the particular research you're working on, the terminology may be different from that in another situation. The same terminologies but kind of different meaning. So that is why you need to define those terms as regards to your own work. Hence the name operational definition of terms. Operational, relating to your own work. In defining terms operationally, individual terms or words to be so defined are identified and then itemized. You itemize them and then you define them one after the other. Thus, operational definitions are usually given in such a way that will suggest that they are not the generally accepted or standard definitions, but those peculiar to the study in particular. Do you get that? The terms may have a different definition in other areas, in other situations, but what you're defining is in relation to the work you're doing. Your statement, your topic, the work you are doing, your own very research. That is what the definition is towards. So they are generally accepted or standard definitions, but those peculiar to the study, peculiar to your own study in particular. This segment usually comes last in the opening chapter. That's why it comes last. You list the items and then you define them based on your work, your own work that you're doing. Like we said, it doesn't have to be exactly the same as the generally accepted definition. Okay, now we have the reference here, Durotolu AO 2001, Educational Research. Okay, the next one is actually supposed to be literature review. I wouldn't want us to go into it now. Okay, let's brush through what we've done already before we just touch the literature review, and then next class we'll still look at it. Like I told you, I wouldn't want us to rush this. As we are going into it, I want us to understand it word for word, understand the whole aspect very well, so when you're talking research, you know what you're talking about. We started from objectives of the study. We said objective is related to the research problem. You have the research problem and you derive your objective from there. This is what I want to do. This is how I want to go about it in achieving that purpose. So that problem you're talking about, the objective, these are the stages, this is what and what you want to do in order to achieve that aim. We talked about the significance of the study. We said it has to contribute to knowledge. If it's not contributing to knowledge, it is not research. You're not doing anything. So it is something that when you do, your result will stand out as giving an addition to existing knowledge. We talked about the scope and limitation. The scope, the extent of coverage, how wide you're going to cover, and then the limitation, those areas you're not supposed to go into because they're not necessary. They only add extra work to what you're doing, they're not necessary to your work, so you limit yourself to a particular area. It will help you to be more focused and it will help you to get your expected results. Then we talked about the basic assumptions. Assumptions are not the same as hypothesis. We've talked about hypothesis before. Assumptions are just mere statements. You cannot test them. They're not subjected to any testing. You just make this. They're just not ordinary statements. So you can see the difference between the assumptions and hypotheses. Hypotheses are subjected to testing. You work on them, you get your results. Operational definition of terms. We talked about different definitions of terms as regards to your line of your work, not necessarily the generally accepted definitions, but as with respect to the work you are doing. All right, let's just look at literature review briefly. There is no doubt that the literature review is an important aspect of any research project. Because if you don't have literature review actually tells you so much about what you're going to work on. So it's a very important aspect of a research project. You get all the information about what you want to work on. As its name implies, literature review involves the collation of ideas, views, positions and opinions expressed in the writing of recognized authorities, as well as findings of previous researchers in one's area of investigation. It's at 2003. So you kind of lean on what the information that you get from other people's work, people that have worked on it before, their views, their ideas. You get information from them, and it helps you to know more about the work you're going to do. Similarly, Akinwumiju 2000 describes the review of related literature as involving the systematic identification, location, and analysis of documents containing information related to the research problem. So you get different documents, different papers that will give you information about the problem you're working on. Remember, even though you have a kind of knowledge about the problem, you don't have all the knowledge about it. You still need to find out, get different information about it. It aims at providing information about what had already been done, how they were done, and with what results. So if you're able to get this information, it will kind of lead you on your own work. Something that's been done already, you need to know how the people that did it, how they went about doing it, and see the results they achieved. It will help you to be able to do yours and also add to what they have given already. One of the very early activities in any research investigation is the review of related literature. By this, we refer to the body of research information relating to the present research. All the necessary information needed to put the research in proper context, once the research problem has been identified and formulated, would derive from the literature review. So this literature review is really very, very important. In fact, every aspect of your research work is important. Without anyone, you cannot do your research. But this literature review is really very, very important. Let's take it again. All the necessary information needed to put the research in proper context, once the research problem has been identified and formulated, would derive from the literature review. So you really need your literature review to get all the information that you need. Until this has been done, the research cannot proceed effectively, considering the great amount of information to be sought from a variety of sources, primary and secondary. There is no doubt that a review of related literature is a serious task, deserving an equally serious attention. In fact, you need to really go deep into this literature review. You need to because you need so much information from it for your work. As a result of this, literature review has been considered as a systematic process that requires careful and perspective reading and attention to detail. Akinwumiju 2000. So your literature review is that important. It's really very important. You need to give it a serious attention. It's not something you just go into, do it anyhow. Just copy and paste whatever you pick. You need to really go into details and understand it very well in order to be able to use the information you will get from it. Thus, its goal is to determine what others have learned or done about similar research problems and to gather information relevant to the current research problem. So when you go into this literature, you're reviewing a literature, something that other people have worked on, similar problem to what you're doing. Then you look at what they did, look at how they went about it, their results, everything. That information is very, very necessary. When you get that information, it will help you in your own research problem. Remember, we always say, no man is an island. No man knows it all. So your what others have done can be a kind of lead to your getting your own results. The chapter 2 of the research project is usually devoted to it. The entire chapter 2 That's to tell you how important it is. Basically, it serves three purposes, namely, 1. To set the theoretical framework for the research problem. To set the theoretical framework for the research problem. Okay, let's put it down. Purposes of the literature review. Purposes of the literature review. 1. We said it sets the theoretical framework for the research problem, the framework for your research project. That's what the literature review does for you, to set the theoretical framework. Okay. Then the next one, to establish the present research efforts within the mainstream of other related ones previously conducted. To establish the present research efforts within the mainstream of the other related ones previously conducted. So it helps you to work alongside what has been done before in order to help you achieve your own goal. Alright, then the third one is to determine the state of the art in that particular area of study. To determine the state of the art in that particular area of study. Alright, so let's run through it again. So the goal of your literature review is to determine what others have learned or done about similar research problems and to gather information relevant to the current research problem. To gather information, only the information that is relevant to your own research problem, not downloading everything they've done. The information you need is the one that is relevant to the research problem. So like we said, the whole of chapter 2 is devoted to this very literature review. We said it serves three purposes: to set the theoretical framework for the research project, to establish the present research efforts within the mainstream of other related ones previously conducted. Sorry about that background noise, please. To set the theoretical framework for the research project, to establish the present research efforts within the mainstream of other related ones previously conducted, and then to determine the state of the art in that particular area of study. So these are the goals of our literature review. Then we look at the components of literature review. We have the conceptual framework, the theoretical review, empirical review. We are going to go deep into these ones in our next class. I don't want to overload you with so many things here. I need you, like I said, to understand them in details. So the components of literature review we will be taking in our next class. Thank you very much. I'll be sending your assignments. Maybe after the next class, I will send you the second assignment. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Bye.